In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Dr. Paulson, it's a great pleasure to be with you today and to be able to engage in a conversation. My sense of politics was formed by Max Weber's classic essay on politics as a vocation. Politics is a calling, not a profession. Politics is an obligation to the citizen and to the world, not an opportunity to rob the people blind. I hope that that formation translates into a sense of optimism that is grounded in very strict realism. So I'll begin with laying down the new normal, the threat, the word of threat, which we confront on a daily basis. Terror, morally reprehensible, it's become sociologically a system. We can no longer dismiss terror, narcotics, or human smuggling as sociological aberrations. There is an ecology that unites all these into a system. The global criminal economy is $1.7 trillion a year. And without understanding and confronting this global criminal economy, we are not going to face our critical problems. In this ecology, the bidding is provided by the criminal economy. That is the platform that enables terrorist financing and the smuggling of human beings. Every Afghan who comes to Europe spends $20,000 to $25,000. Our globalism is focused on the freedom of the well-to-do, but restrictions to the poor. And we need to understand this profound inequality in order to be able to deal with it systematically. It is a joint problem. It is not either our problem or yours. What we need to understand that together we have a series of problems that need to be solved. Terrorism, as an ecology, is inhabited first by networks that are cross-national in composition. The world of the state is organized around hierarchies. The world of criminality is organized around networks. I'll come back to the morphology, but networks, by definition, are fast and self-replicating, while states, even the best, are slow and deliberate, which makes them respond to the needs and aspirations of the citizens, but otherwise, cooperation between states is a fundamental problem. The second thing, you spoke of forms of order, but we live, particularly in our part of the world, with absence of rules of the game between states. The ecology of terror is made possible both by terrorists, but also by indifference of states and by the willingness of some states in the past to use malign state actors as instruments of policy. As long as some states differentiate between good and bad terrorists, all the state system is going to be in peril. So getting the rules of the game right is fundamental. Acheson famously observed in Present Creation that at that time, in the world of post-45, they got half the word right. And we've been dealing with the legacy of not getting the other half right. Second, terrorism is acquired a morphology, as is criminality in general, as if movements of violence. The morphology is that they are very fast changing. It took Al-Qaeda 20 years to move from planning to its heinous attack on the World Trade Centers, with trials along the way in Kenya, in Yemen. But Daesh moved from conception to execution within 4 years. In terms of network theory, and there's been some very substantial analysis, open source, that I commend to everybody. It's been done by CENTCOM. Daesh's formation passes 5 to 6 stages of network theory formation. This is a morphology of constant change. And in this world, cyber is become critical. We are not dealing with face-to-face communities of terror. We are not dealing with classic hierarchies. We are dealing with fast replicating movements that are recruiting through the internet, that forms of action that replicate and create the ground. So unless we understand the enemy and the threat that we're dealing with, our response will be partial. With apologies to Microsoft, if Al-Qaeda was version 1, Daesh is version 6. And we need to be prepared for version 6 and 8 and 9. I think Moore's law, that half-time of innovation is repeatedly halved, is now applying to these networks of violence. And again, by contrast, first understanding of the phenomena is fragmented. Intelligence is organized around countries. Sharing of a common vocabulary regarding threats is still absent. And much more fundamental than the initial understanding, of course, common frameworks of action as to whether the threat is short-term, medium-term, or long-term, or combination is still in search of an answer. But the third aspect is the pathology. You've seen the recent news. Istanbul, the Russian plane in Sharm el-Sheikh, Beirut, Paris, Mali, and unfortunately, the list could go on. What is characteristic here is that the pathology is directed towards producing news. The narrative of the news cycle is now set by the action of terrorists. Which day has it been in the past months that the news has not been dominated by these networks, that they have not set the terms of the coverage? The counter-narrative is weak. It's there, but it's manifested in action in an unusual set of policies, not in a coherent narrative that previous struggles have enabled us to deal with. So in this kind of pathology, who's the object? And what's been the goal? First, our freedom of movement. The tourist industry has been hit in the past months because freedom of movement for tourism has been one of the fundamentals of freedom of movement. But second, the trust between the state and citizen is the key objective. Can you imagine people in Paris looking over their shoulders constantly to watch where the next threat is coming? New York of 1970s, where I lived, that was quite common. But Paris of 2015, no. And in between, of course, is the most fundamental of social contracts that is under attack. The trust of the citizen that state institutions will protect them, will guarantee the freedoms that have become routine. So as a result, the randomness is actually ordered. And it needs reflection and our ability to deal with it. So I hope that I've delineated the key issues of threat, and within this, the crisis of refugees, again, is related both to lack of certainty, and the criminality that underwrites this. Why is it that narcotics travels through well-ordered governments? Why is it that there is no fundamental focus on dealing with the root causes of narcotics and its elimination? Is it time that the habits of the middle class in some wealthy countries need to change so that we can deal with the root causes of this criminality and at other aspects of this criminality, as well as finance? The world of finance is highly criminalized. It takes one transaction for black money to move then to the cycle of global finance. We have a comprehensive threat, and it requires comprehensive understanding and measures to deal with. But let me next turn to the opportunities, because if my job is described probably as one of the two most difficult jobs on earth, and I don't know how close the competitor is, but it's a job very much well doing, because the fate of 30 million people depends on it. And I'm very proud of the Afghan public who've engaged in one of the most democratic conversations and are continuing to engage in a democratic conversation. We're a resilient people. Anyone else in our position today would have abandoned everything. Yes, some of us are moving, but what needs to be remarked upon is for 30,000 that have left, there are 30 million that are determined to stay. We have faced one of the most brutal attacks in the last 40 years in 2015. An all-out war was declared against us. It has gone through 7 phases. If in conversation there was interest, I could describe it to you. What was the strategic objective? The strategic objective was to create 2 political geographies in Afghanistan and then force us into a humiliating peace deal. Most analysts last year, when we faced our triple transition simultaneously, the political transition, the security transition, and the economic transition, were not giving us any chance. Today, our armed forces, our security and defense forces, have stood their ground. Yes, we've paid a very high price, but it's the price of patriotism. And I'm very proud to have been functioning as the commander-in-chief. The last thing I wanted, given my formation, which is social theory and citizenship, was to be forced into the role of commander-in-chief, but I've played it proudly. And I'm very proud that our forces are standing. And in this regard, let me pay first tribute to the 54 Germans who paid the highest price in helping us create the institutions that today are able to cope with the departure of 130,000 NATO ISAF troops and stand their ground. And second, let me thank Germany for its remarkable leadership this year. I'm very grateful to Chancellor Merkel for not only Germany's contribution, but for partnering with us to persuade the rest of our partners, including a very cogent argument to President Obama that Afghanistan was worth investing in and continued supporting. German support from civil society, from foundations, from political parties, and particularly from the government, has been highly welcome in our 100 years, I hope, will continue for centuries. But the larger world of opportunities. First, Asia is transforming from a geographical notion into a continental economy. Afghanistan is in the middle of 4 billion consumers. And when you look at the map, all routes in the past for Asian trade, pilgrimage, and yes, at times conquest, have led through Afghanistan. Our location, which for 200 years was a phenomenal deficit, is in the next 25 years going to become one of the most important assets in the region. Our vision, and it's not just empty vision, is to become the hub for a series of connectivities. The first project, taking energy from Kyrgyzstan onto Tajikistan, then to Afghanistan and Pakistan, is already underway. We've raised $1 billion for it, and it's soon going to be implemented. The Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline on 13th of December, ground-laying ceremony is going to take place in Ashgabat. It's moving from theory to practice. Turkmen Railway is going to reach our border in February, transmission lines. So what is really significant is to see the space that was a cul-de-sac into a roundabout. Roundabout are places where ideas, people, and goods move freely and flow. The networks of violence need to be confronted by networks of virtue. And that's the possibility that is on offer. Second, the fundamental question is always asked, will Afghanistan be able to afford statehood in financial terms? Because today, of course, the overwhelming set of resources that underwrite statehood is derived from foreign aid. And the world is tired, exhausted with the syndrome of foreign aid, particularly when foreign aid is not effective. 1/3 of our geography that has been documented to date is worth between $1 and $3 trillion. In the next 20 years, we will become the largest producer of copper and the largest producer of iron in the world. We will become a significant player in the gold market. We have 14 of the 17 rare earth material, and most geologists describe us as the Saudi Arabia of lithium. That gives us a very different set of connectivities. And in terms of environment, we have the headwaters. Except for China, every single one of our neighbors depends on us as the upper riparian. In the next 10 years, with 2 degrees of global warming, our water is going to be as valuable, if not more valuable, than the oil of our neighbors. But the most fundamental asset that gives me hope are our people. So some of the characteristics of the people, and then I can conclude. I stay within your 15 minutes, Ms. Miller. I'm very disciplined. The indirect impact of my grandfather being exposed to German education is paid. I'm always on time, and hopefully. Our people have several characteristics. First is, we are not a nation of beggars. You don't find Afghans begging on the streets. We interact, we trade, we take our destiny in our hands. But our dignity has been fundamental to our resilience. Second, we are young people. We are an ancient land, but inhabited by very young people. 70% of our people is below 35. Every day, every month, we become younger. Only 3% of our population is above 60. And we have 3 majorities that are numerical majorities, but political economic minorities. Women. Women probably are a numerical majority because we lost 1.5 million people defending our freedom against the former Soviet Union, and the majority of them were men. And naturally, there are 104 women born to 100 men. Empowerment of women is critical, and the change in our women in positions of leadership is enormous. 2 years ago, it was taboo to talk about a woman being on the Supreme Court of Afghanistan. I had the honor of nominating the first woman to the Supreme Court of Afghanistan, and she lost only by 9 votes, and it was the fault of women deputies who were not present all there. So next conversation next year is going to be very much about women being present to make those changes. The second is the youth. Our youth is the majority. Again, both men and women. But the question of empowerment of the youth is the critical issue. Here, I want to thank GIZ for an enormously constructive set of studies and for indicating there's a German, a remarkable German in Afghanistan who spent 5 years studying vocational schooling. And I had 3 hours of fascinating conversations after I read the 6 papers. He thinks we can get vocational education right. And if we get vocational education right, illegal migration will turn to legal migration to the Gulf and North Asia. The demography of migration needs our understanding. The Gulf needs legal migrants, and East Asia, Northeast Asia, is having the demographic transition. We should not give way to fear regarding this. This is a phenomena that can be dealt with systematically. The pull and push factors need to be dealt with, and again, I'm sure you'll have questions, so I don't want to elaborate. And the last, and the key group, of course, are the poor. 36% of our population lives below the $1.25 of the World Bank. But if you change the poverty line to $2, it would go to 70%. I'm describing these to describe to you what the legacy is that our government of national unity has received. But precisely because we know what is the legacy, now we are determined to overcome it. And in this regard, our key issue, of course, is to overcome the ineffectiveness of the government, the pervasive corruption of the past, the pervasive lack of accountability. What becomes key to responsibility is to own the problem ourselves. What has shifted from before, and we are very proud of the conversations that we have had, since my inauguration, the formation of the government of national unity, is that we Afghans own our problems, define them, and define the solutions. And in this regard, you have partners in Afghanistan that are willing to tackle all the issues, whether it's counterterrorism, whether it's counter-narcotics, whether it's illegal migration, in a systematic, coherent manner, so we know what the dimensions of the problem are, how we relate to each other, and particularly how we create the grounds for partnerships that are not reactive but proactive. Because if I'm correct from the analysis that I've presented to you, our problems are medium-term, and the solutions need to be matching short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions in a systematic framework.